Jordan lay in the sterile, dimly lit hospital room, her body aching from the surgery that had taken longer than expected. She'd been through so much, but this final step, this transition from one identity to another, had been the hardest. The physical pain was manageable, it was the emotional exhaustion that seemed to stretch her beyond what she could bear. Her body, still bruised from the procedure, ached in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the quiet humming of the fluorescent lights overhead only seemed to deepen the sense of isolation she had felt ever since she entered the hospital. The room felt cold and impersonal, the white walls devoid of warmth, save for a single painting of a sailboat on a distant sea that hung above the bed. She tried not to focus on the pain but couldn't help the sharp twinges in her chest. Surgery had done its part, but recovery was never a linear journey. She had prepared herself for weeks for this moment, but now, as she lay here, physically healed but mentally bruised, the reality of the situation felt different. The door creaked open, and Jordan shifted her gaze toward it, half expecting someone to walk in who wouldn't see her as just another patient, a case. Samantha, the nurse who had been assigned to her care, entered with a clipboard in hand. She was in her mid-30s, with short cropped hair and a smile that felt more rehearsed than genuine. She looked the part of an ally. She spoke out for LGBTQ+ rights. She was the first to raise her hand when the hospital initiated diversity training, but Jordan had already noticed something that didn't sit right. Samantha's eyes met Jordan's, but they didn't linger. The smile that greeted her was polite, professional, but something about it felt forced. Samantha had always been quick to label herself as an ally, proudly displaying a rainbow pin on her nurse's uniform and talking openly about her support for the trans community. But Jordan couldn't help but notice the subtle discomfort that sometimes flashed in Samantha's eyes when she'd mention her transition. It wasn't much, but it was there. "Hey there, Jordan," Samantha greeted, her tone upbeat but lacking warmth. "How are we feeling today?" Jordan gave her a tight-lipped smile, forcing herself to sit up a little straighter, even though every movement made her muscles protest. "Better than yesterday, I think." "That's good to hear," Samantha responded, her eyes briefly flicking down to the chart in her hands. She scanned through it with practiced efficiency, yet Jordan could feel the distance in the way she was handled, like she was just another patient on a long list. She could sense that Samantha was trying her best, but the barriers between them were more than just professional. Jordan sighed, biting her lip. She had been prepared for the physical toll of surgery, but she wasn't prepared for this, the emotional weight of navigating a world that saw her as too much to handle. To be truly seen was still a constant battle. She had expected compassion from an ally, not indifference wrapped in the guise of tolerance. And yet, with every word Samantha spoke, Jordan was beginning to question just how much of Samantha's allyship was surface level. As the nurse adjusted the fore and checked her vitals, Jordan's mind wandered. Is this what it meant to be an ally? To say the right words, wear the right pins, but withhold the genuine care needed to make someone feel human? To Jordan, the difference between allyship and true empathy had never felt clearer, and she was beginning to wonder if Samantha was as much of an ally as she claimed to be. Jordan shifted uncomfortably in her hospital bed, the sterile white sheets bunched up around her, adding to the sense of confinement. She had been trying to ignore the dull ache that spread across her chest, but it felt as if the pain was a constant companion, following her through each hour of recovery. The incision site, still raw and tender, seemed to throb with every movement, reminding her of the weight of the decision she had made. But even more than the physical discomfort, there was an emotional sting she couldn't shake, a sensation of being out of place, in a room where her body was seen as a battleground, her identity as something to be scrutinized and questioned. As the minutes ticked by, the door to her room creaked open, and Samantha stepped in, clipboard in hand. The nurse's entrance was punctuated by the soft click of her shoes against the floor, a sound that only seemed to add to the sterile atmosphere of the room. Samantha looked up and offered Jordan a practiced smile, but it was shallow, like she was going through the motions more than offering any genuine warmth. "How are you feeling today, Jordan?" Samantha asked, her tone too upbeat for the heaviness in the room. Jordan shifted in the bed, wincing slightly at the movement. "I'm in a lot of pain," she admitted, her voice softer than she intended. "My chest is really sore, and I can't seem to get comfortable." Samantha didn't immediately respond. Instead, She adjusted the drip, her fingers moving mechanically as she glanced over the equipment by the bed. She seemed distracted, her gaze darting from one thing to the next, like she was eager to move on. "I can give you something for the pain," Samantha said after a beat, though her voice lacked any real empathy. "But it's pretty common, the soreness. You'll get used to it soon enough." Jordan nodded, trying to suppress the frustration bubbling up in her chest. She had hoped for more, a little kindness, perhaps, something beyond the clinical detachment that Samantha was offering. But the nurse's words, though not outright rude, felt dismissive. It was as though she didn't see Jordan as someone who needed support, but rather as another patient to check off the list. I don't know," Jordan continued, struggling to find the right words. "I feel like my body's not mine anymore, like it's betraying me. The pain is just constant." Samantha paused, her eyes briefly meeting Jordan's, but the moment felt hollow. "It'll pass," Samantha replied, her voice flat. Then, as if it were an afterthought, she added, "It's just part of the process, you know? Most people would have been fine with, well, whatever you were born with. But I guess that's the price for extreme transitions." The words hit Jordan like a slap to the face. Extreme transitions. Samantha had said it so casually, so effortlessly, without realizing the harm that was woven into her comment. The subtext was clear. Jordan's identity was something that was hard to understand, something out of the ordinary, something that didn't belong. Jordan's breath caught in her throat, a wave of hurt and anger rushing through her. She had heard these kinds of comments before, offhanded remarks about how extreme her journey was, how unnatural it seemed to others. But hearing it from Samantha, who had always proclaimed to be an ally, cut deeper than she expected. I didn't think you'd see it that way," Jordan finally managed to say, her voice shaky, but firm. She could feel the emotional weight of the moment settling into her chest, her heart pounding as she gathered the courage to speak. "You're an ally, right? I thought that meant something different." Samantha blinked, clearly taken aback by the unexpected response. What do you mean?" she asked, her tone a mix of defensiveness and confusion. Jordan shook her head, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You can't claim to be an ally when you call someone's identity extreme. That's not how it works." The room seemed to shrink around them, the tension thickening the air between them. Samantha opened her mouth as if to say something more, but then closed it, unsure of how to respond. It was clear that she had missed the mark. She had failed to see the person in front of her as anything other than a patient in need of care. But for Jordan, this wasn't just about physical recovery, it was about being seen, truly seen, for who she was. The silence hung heavy, as both women sat in it, each processing the unexpected gulf between what was supposed to be an ally's support and the painful reality of dismissive ignorance. The tension had shifted, and now, it wasn't just about recovery from surgery. It was about a deeper, more painful truth: not all allies were created equal. And sometimes, the worst betrayals came from those who claimed to be on your side. The next morning, the sterile, quiet environment of the hospital felt even more suffocating to Jordan. She had barely slept, and when she did, her dreams were filled with shadows of her former self, a body she no longer recognized. The pain from her surgery was still present, but it was the emotional weight that felt unbearable now. That one offhand comment, that one remark about being too extreme, had festered in her mind throughout the night, gnawing at her self-worth like a persistent ache. Samantha came into her room shortly after the sun had risen, but Jordan could hardly bring herself to look at her. There was a distance now, an invisible wall between them that couldn't be ignored. Every smile Samantha gave her felt performative, like a script she was reading from rather than a gesture of genuine care. Jordan had tried to let it go, to focus on her healing, but the more she thought about it, the more that comment seemed to define their relationship, even if Samantha had no idea of the weight it carried. Samantha's shift was nearing its end when Jordan overheard something that made her stomach churn. The door to her room was slightly ajar as she lay in bed, and from where she lay, she could hear Samantha talking to another nurse in the hallway. The conversation began as a mundane exchange about shifts and patient updates, but then Jordan heard her name mentioned, and her ears perked up, though she tried to stay still and unnoticed. Jordan's case is just a lot. The whole transition thing is so extreme. It's like, why couldn't she just have been happy the way she was, you know? Samantha's voice was low, but the words were unmistakable. Jordan's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening as the words struck her like an icy wave. Too extreme. It was the same phrase, but hearing it spoken behind her back, in such a casual, dismissive way, was even more hurtful than she could have imagined. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back tears, her chest tightening with a combination of anger and disappointment. Samantha had never said anything so directly before. Her allyship had always been a carefully crafted image, a way to appear supportive while never truly understanding the deep complexities of being trans, or even truly questioning the social norms she took for granted. But now it was clear, Samantha's version of allyship was a facade, a label she wore without ever understanding what it truly meant. Jordan lay still in her bed, feeling as though the room itself had grown smaller, as though she were being suffocated not just by the physical pain in her body, but by the weight of Samantha's words. She had thought that being an ally meant more than just surface-level support. But now, she questioned everything she had assumed. What did it mean to be an ally if someone like Samantha, who had spoken out for LGBTQ+ rights, could still harbor such prejudices, albeit unconsciously? The emotional toll of that realization was profound. The hurt cut deeper than any physical wound could, because it wasn't just Samantha who had failed her. It was the entire system of so-called allyship, the endless rhetoric of inclusion that never seemed to translate into real support. This was a moment of betrayal, but also of truth. Even those who claimed to support you could hold biases that cut through their well-intentioned actions. Jordan turned her head toward the window, unable to face Samantha. She had been so vulnerable with her, sharing her fears, her pain, and her hopes for understanding. But now she realized that no amount of words, no rainbow pin or social media post, could erase the silent prejudices people held within themselves. And as much as she wanted to believe that the world could be better, more compassionate, and more inclusive, moments like this made her question just how far the fight for true allyship really had come. By the time Samantha entered the room later that day, Jordan had made up her mind. The pain in her chest was still there, but it was overshadowed by the searing anger that had built up inside her since overhearing Samantha's hurtful comments. She had tried to give the nurse the benefit of the doubt, tried to convince herself that maybe Samantha didn't mean it, that maybe it was just an offhand remark. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the pain wasn't just about the words. It was about the realization that the allyship Samantha had so proudly displayed was a lie, a convenient label rather than a genuine commitment to understanding. When Samantha walked in, clipboard in hand, Jordan sat up straighter than she had in days. Her gaze was fixed on the nurse, her expression no longer polite or passive. It was hard, almost painful, but Jordan couldn't stay silent any longer. "Samantha," Jordan began, her voice tight with emotion, "we need to talk." Samantha looked up, startled by the seriousness in Jordan's tone. She set down the clipboard and stepped closer to the bed. "Of course, Jordan, what's on your mind?" Jordan swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt this vulnerable, this exposed, but the anger inside her was too strong to ignore. "I overheard you earlier," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "I heard what you said about me." Samantha's face faltered for just a second, her eyes darting nervously to the door before meeting Jordan's gaze again. "What are you talking about?" she asked, though her voice was already betraying her discomfort. "You said my transition was too extreme," Jordan continued, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You called me extreme, like I'm some kind of freak. Do you really think that? Is that how you see me? As just a case, someone who's too much to handle?" Samantha's face flushed, and she stepped back slightly, clearly flustered. "Jordan, I didn't mean to offend you," she stammered, her defensive posture immediately kicking in. "You know I'm an ally. I care about the LGBTQ+ community. She faltered, clearly trying to find the right words, but failing miserably. "I just can't really understand everything you've gone through. I mean, the changes, they're a lot." Jordan's heart hammered in her chest, the hurt from earlier now swirling into a mixture of frustration and sadness. She could feel the wall of defensiveness rising between them, but she refused to back down. "You can't understand?" "You're right," Jordan said, her voice almost cold now. You can't understand because you've never had to fight for your identity every single day. You've never had to look in the mirror and feel like the world is telling you that who you are is wrong. But that doesn't give you the right to reduce my experience to extreme changes. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. That's not allyship. That's ignorance. Samantha opened her mouth to say something, but Jordan held up her hand, cutting her off. I don't need your apology, Samantha. I don't need your pity. What I need is for you to see me. Not as a project. Not as someone you can label and then check off your list of being supportive. Samantha stood there, silent, her face contorted in a mixture of confusion and guilt. She had wanted to be an ally, had wanted to be supportive, but in that moment, it was clear to her that her actions hadn't matched her intentions. She hadn't truly understood what it meant to stand with someone, really stand with them, in their journey. And as the silence stretched between them, she realized how deeply her own biases had clouded her judgment. Jordan wasn't sure what she expected from this confrontation, but as the weight of the words hung in the air, she felt a sense of clarity. She had finally found her voice, and it was powerful, raw, and unflinching. She wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how well-meaning they seemed, undermine her humanity. After a long, charged silence, Samantha sighed, looking down at the floor. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said quietly, her voice heavy with regret. But I see now. I see that I have a lot to learn. About you. About what it really means to be an ally. Jordan nodded, her emotions a swirl of exhaustion and relief. I hope you do. Because I deserve more than surface-level support. We all do. The silence between Jordan and Samantha lingered for a long time, thick with the weight of their confrontation. Jordan's chest felt lighter now, though. It wasn't that the anger had completely faded, or that the hurt had evaporated, but for the first time in days, she felt seen, truly seen, for who she was. She had spoken up, laid bare her feelings, and in doing so, had reclaimed her voice. The emotional toll of the past few days seemed less heavy now, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Samantha stood across from her, her shoulders hunched slightly, her eyes focused on the floor as though she were processing 1,000 thoughts at once. She had always believed herself to be a good ally, had prided herself on being supportive of marginalized communities, especially the LGBTQ+ community. But Jordan's words had shattered that illusion. She could no longer hide behind the badge of allyship she had worn for so long. Allyship wasn't a title you claimed, it was a responsibility, one that required understanding, reflection, and action. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Samantha began, her voice soft, almost tentative. She didn't look up at Jordan, but her words were sincere. I thought being an ally was enough. That showing up, saying the right things, that would be enough to prove I care. But I see now that it's not. She paused, clearly grappling with the realization. It's not just about saying the words. It's about understanding, truly understanding what you're going through, and what I can do to support you, not just in public, but in private too. Jordan watched Samantha, feeling a mixture of empathy and guarded skepticism. She could see the remorse in her eyes, but it wasn't just about the apology. It was about what came next. She had been hurt, yes, but this wasn't about demanding an apology, it was about ensuring that things changed. And she didn't expect change to happen overnight. You can't just wear the label of ally, Jordan said, her voice firm yet softer now. It has to be something you live, something you actively do every day. It's not about just showing up when it's convenient or talking the talk when everyone else is listening. It's about being there, even when no one is watching, and doing the work that needs to be done, even when it's uncomfortable. Samantha nodded, swallowing her pride. I know, she murmured. I can see now that I have a lot of work to do. I can't just go through the motions anymore. I have to unlearn so much, and I don't even know where to start. Jordan's heart softened at her vulnerability, but she didn't let herself get swept away by sympathy. This was an important moment for both of them, but it was also a turning point. The real work isn't easy, she said, her voice quieter now, as though speaking to herself as much as to Samantha, but it's worth it. I don't expect you to have all the answers. I don't even have all the answers. But at least now, you're listening. And that's the first step. Samantha finally met Jordan's gaze, and for the first time, there was no defensiveness in her expression, no walls. Just openness, a raw acknowledgement of her shortcomings. "I will listen," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. "And I will do better." Jordan nodded, the sense of relief that had been building within her slowly turning into resolve. She wasn't naive, she knew that this moment didn't erase the harm done, nor did it guarantee that Samantha would immediately change. But it was a start. It was a new beginning, one where both of them could grow. And that, Jordan thought, was something worth holding on to. As Samantha left the room, Jordan lay back in her bed, her mind racing with the possibilities of what came next. She had taken a crucial step in her own healing, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time in a long while, she felt empowered by the choices she had made, the voice she had found. And as she stared out the window, the soft light of the afternoon filtering in, Jordan knew that her journey was far from over. But now, at least, she had the strength to walk it, not just for herself, but with the knowledge that true allyship was more than just words. It was a practice, one that required real, everyday action. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever came next.